It was a moment frozen in time, as the harsh sound of sirens split the air, cutting through the evening stillness. The streets, usually bustling with the rhythm of city life, were now quiet under the orange glow of streetlights. Sam, a 23-year-old woman with a cane gripped tightly in her hand, walked slowly down the sidewalk, her faithful guide dog Duke by her side. The bond between them was unspoken but deeply felt. Duke had been her guide, her eyes for the past 5 years. His sharp ears, his constant vigilance, his loyalty. She trusted him with everything. But tonight was different. The sudden, jarring screech of tires tore through the air, and Sam's senses heightened. She tensed, her breath caught in her throat. Duke stood still, his body rigid, his tail stiff. Something was wrong, and then they appeared. 2 uniformed officers, their dark silhouettes advancing swiftly toward her. Sam felt a sharp pang of confusion as the officers barked orders at her. They didn't ask, they didn't speak gently. They were aggressive, shouting things she couldn't fully understand. It wasn't until one of them lunged toward Duke, pulling him away from her, that the panic began to seep in. Sam's heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing to process the moment. She opened her mouth to shout, to explain, but no words came. It wasn't the way things should be. This wasn't supposed to happen. The city streets, always so predictable, felt foreign now. Sam's every step was measured, each tap of her cane sending ripples of sound into the world around her. Duke, her ever-vigilant companion, kept pace by her side, a constant reminder of the trust they shared. They had navigated the world together for years, finding their rhythm. They were a team, inseparable, an extension of each other. But tonight, as they walked through the night, the quiet hum of traffic suddenly felt like an ominous warning. Duke stiffened, his instincts kicking in before Sam even noticed. He growled low, his body braced for something she could not yet comprehend. In that moment, she felt it too, the oppressive weight of something wrong in the air. She slowed her steps, sensing the tension that radiated from him. And then it happened. The squad car screeched to a halt in front of them, its lights flashing violently. Sam's heart skipped a beat. She heard the unmistakable sound of a door slamming open. The officers' voices were distorted by the roaring wind as they shouted commands, their words a blur of authority and aggression. Duke, sensing the hostility, was already positioning himself in front of Sam, his body poised protectively. He barked once, the sound sharp and commanding. Sam's hands clenched around the handle of her cane, but she couldn't see them. Couldn't read their expressions, couldn't gauge their intent. She could only feel the air crackling with tension. Then, without warning, the first officer reached out. His hand grabbed for Duke's collar. Sam's breath caught in her throat. The moment stretched, as though time itself hesitated, unwilling to let go of this fragile edge. In a blur of motion, the officer yanked Duke away from Sam. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Stop!" She screamed, but the words were swallowed by the chaos around her. Duke struggled, his paws scrabbling against the pavement as he fought to stay close to Sam. The officer's grip tightened, his actions more forceful than necessary. "Please?" "No," Sam begged, her voice trembling as panic took hold of her. She felt her world tipping, a sinking feeling in her stomach as she reached out, grasping for Duke but missing his fur. The officer ignored her pleas, his movements mechanical, as though his mind had already made up its judgment. He saw a dog, nothing more. The second officer, meanwhile, stood to the side, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the area as if anticipating a threat. Sam's heart thudded painfully in her chest as the streetlights flickered above them. Duke's growls had softened into desperate whines. She could hear him gasping for air. The officer's words came in short bursts, directed not at Sam but at Duke. "Control your animal," one shouted. "You need to calm it down." It was as if they had forgotten Sam wasn't just another pedestrian. They had failed to see her. She was a young woman, blind and vulnerable, trying to live a life of independence. But to them, she was just an inconvenience. They were in control, they believed, and Sam and Duke were the ones who needed to be subdued. Tears welled up in Sam's eyes, frustration bubbling over as she reached helplessly for Duke. She could feel the officer's indifference, the cold judgment they cast on her and her companion. The world around her felt like it was closing in, like she was being swallowed by a force much greater than herself. But then, in a moment of clarity, something shifted. Duke, his body still held by the officer, let out a single sharp bark, more than just a command. It was a cry for help. The attack was brief, but the consequences would stretch far beyond that night. Sam couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness that clung to her like a second skin. She had tried to regain her independence, but now it seemed like the very system was meant to protect her had become her greatest adversary. She spent days in her apartment, reeling from the assault, replaying every detail over and over again. The memory of Duke's distress still echoed in her ears, and it left her feeling raw. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the officer's hands on him, the cruelty of their touch, the disregard for the bond they shared. She had failed him. She felt like she had failed herself. It wasn't until a week later, when the local news picked up the story, that Sam realized what had happened wasn't just a personal violation. It was a public one. The outrage was swift. Advocacy groups rallied behind her, voices rising in unison, calling for justice for a woman and her service dog. The support was overwhelming. Emails, phone calls, messages of solidarity flooded in. Sam wasn't alone. She had the strength of a community behind her. The police department issued an apology, but it wasn't enough. Sam wanted accountability, wanted to ensure this would never happen to anyone else. But the road to justice was long. It wasn't just about getting an apology. It was about changing the system, ensuring that the value of a service dog was recognized, and that the humanity of a blind person was seen. Sam wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every person who had ever been misunderstood, overlooked, and disregarded. Months passed. The court hearings were endless, and Sam found herself caught in a battle she never expected to fight. She relived the trauma each time she took the stand, each time she spoke about the attack. But through it all, she grew stronger. She no longer felt like the girl trapped in her own silence. She began to find her voice, and it was loud, clear, and unshakable. Duke, too, had become a symbol, no longer just her guide, but a beacon for others who had been silenced. Their bond had deepened, their trust unbroken. Together, they had learned to navigate a world that had shown them its darkest side, but also its brightest light. When the final verdict came through, it was a victory, but not one that felt complete. The officers were held accountable, but it was the change in the public mindset that mattered most. Duke had not only been her protector, but a symbol of hope, showing the world that the strength of a bond between a woman and her service dog could never be shattered by cruelty. Sam stood on the same street corner where it all began. Duke's leash gently held in her hand. The air was warmer now, the sky stretched out in a soft, golden hue. The streets seemed less menacing, less foreign. The weight of the past still lingered, but it no longer held her in its grip. She had reclaimed her space in the world, her place beside Duke, and together, they would continue moving forward. Duke, his tail wagging gently behind him, nudged Sam's leg as if reassuring her. She smiled, feeling the warmth of his presence. There was a sense of peace now, a quiet, hard-won peace. As they walked side by side, the world no longer felt so overwhelming. It was just them now, the girl and her dog, facing the world together, ready for whatever came next. And as Sam took another step, the city felt a little smaller, a little safer. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't just about winning. They're about surviving, growing, and, above all, continuing to walk forward. In the end, what mattered most was that they were still walking, together. The sun rose slowly, casting golden hues across the horizon as Sam stood at her window, looking out at the city she had once feared. The streets, so overwhelming just months ago, now seemed to hum with a new kind of energy, a promise of possibility. She had spent too many years afraid of being misunderstood, of being pushed aside, of having to live in the shadows of others' perceptions. But today, something had shifted within her. It wasn't the city that had changed, it was her. And Duke, her constant, her heart, her protector, had been the one to lead her to this point. He had shown her the courage she had buried deep within herself. There was no longer any hesitation in her movements. Her cane, once just a tool for navigating the world, now felt like an extension of herself. Every tap of it against the pavement was a declaration of independence, a reminder of everything she had endured and everything she had overcome. Sam and Duke had been through hell together. But now they were stepping into a new chapter, a chapter of healing and strength. She could feel the weight of the past lifting as she walked through the streets. The world around her still had its edges, but she had learned to navigate them with grace. She knew where she was and where she was headed. The neighborhood felt alive as she passed familiar faces, people who had seen her struggle, who had watched her fight for her rights, for her dignity. There were no more whispers behind her back, no more pitying stares. What once felt like a suffocating existence was now filled with the warmth of acceptance and understanding. Sam had become a symbol, not just of resilience, but of the possibility that the world could be kinder, more open, if we allowed ourselves to listen and truly see each other. One afternoon, Sam found herself sitting at a cafe, Duke curled comfortably at her feet. The sunlight filtered through the windows, casting soft patterns on the floor. It was a peaceful moment, one she had longed for but never believed would come. She was writing a letter, her fingers lightly touching the pen, the words coming slowly but steadily. It was a letter of gratitude to those who had supported her, those who had spoken up for her when she couldn't find the words. Her heart was full, not with anger, but with something quieter, something more powerful: gratitude. Gratitude for the people who had stood by her, for the strength she had discovered within herself, and for the love that had always existed in the bond she shared with Duke. But it wasn't just about looking back. Sam's eyes were now set on the future. She wanted to do more. She wanted to speak up for others who felt voiceless, others who had been crushed by the weight of misunderstanding. She wasn't just going to survive. She was going to thrive, and she was going to bring others along with her. The road ahead was no longer daunting. It was wide open, stretching out in front of her, filled with endless possibilities. Sam knew the journey wouldn't always be easy, but she was ready for it. And with Duke by her side, she knew that together they could face anything the world had in store for them. The sound of Duke's gentle breathing beside her was the only noise in the quiet cafe. Sam smiled softly. It was a moment of peace, of stillness. She had earned it, and she wasn't about to let it go. Days turned into weeks, and Sam's life began to take on a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. She had become an advocate, speaking at rallies, joining panels, and sharing her story wherever she could. Her name had become synonymous with resilience and the fight for dignity. People came to her, inspired by her strength, by her refusal to be silenced. It was an overwhelming feeling to know that her pain had sparked something greater. A movement for those who had been ignored, for those who had lived in the margins of society. But even as she found her voice in the world, there were days when the shadows of the past would creep in. The memories of the attack, of the fear that had gripped her body, still lingered in quiet corners of her mind. There were nights when she would wake, her heart pounding, her breath shallow, the images of that moment still vivid. But Duke, her ever-present companion, was there, always ready to comfort her. The weight of the world felt a little lighter with him by her side. His warm presence, his quiet understanding, was a balm to her soul. The trauma would never fully disappear. But with each passing day it became more manageable. Duke had healed her in ways she hadn't even realized. His companionship had been more than just a service dog. He had been her rock, her anchor in a world that had once felt so uncertain. And Sam, she was no longer the same person she had been before the attack. She had grown, evolved, and learned to navigate her world with a newfound sense of purpose. She had learned that vulnerability was not a weakness, but a strength that gave her the power to rise again, no matter how many times she fell. One evening, as Sam and Duke walked through a park near their apartment, the evening air cool against her skin, she realized how far she had come. The world still wasn't perfect, and there were days when the battle felt never-ending. But she no longer felt alone. She had found her tribe, the people who understood her, who fought alongside her, who lifted her up when the weight of the world became too much. And through it all, Duke remained the one constant in her life, the one soul who had never wavered, who had always believed in her, even when she couldn't believe in herself. Together, they had faced darkness and emerged stronger. Together, they had become unbroken. As they reached the park bench, Sam sat down, her fingers brushing Duke's fur. She closed her eyes, feeling the soft breeze on her face, the sound of distant laughter from children playing nearby. It was a peaceful moment, a reminder of the beauty in the world, even in the midst of chaos. This was her life now. A life of purpose, a life of healing, a life of love. And with Duke at her side, Sam knew there was nothing she couldn't face. Nothing that would ever tear them apart. She smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin, and took a deep breath, ready for whatever came next. The world had begun to see Sam not just as a blind woman with a service dog, but as a symbol of quiet resilience, a testament to the power of advocacy and the unspoken strength of those who are often overlooked. She had started to feel a shift in how people treated her, how they no longer saw her disability first, but recognized her humanity first. The fight for justice, while personal, had reached far beyond her own experience. Sam continued to be invited to speak at various events, often sharing her story to large audiences. With each speech, with each interview, her story rippled outward, touching more lives than she could have ever imagined. She shared not only her pain but her healing, the long and difficult path she had walked, and how it had shaped her into someone stronger than she thought possible. Her story resonated with so many, those who had suffered similar injustices, those who had felt helpless, lost in their own struggles. The numbers of people who reached out to her, thanking her for giving them a voice, were overwhelming. And in every moment of connection, she saw the spark of hope being rekindled in others. It was not just her story anymore, it was their story too. She had given them a space to breathe, a place to reclaim their own narrative. Sam's social media following grew exponentially as people shared her message, spreading it further than any news outlet could. She had become the face of change, the face of a movement that was larger than her personal battle. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about all of them. Those who had been silent for too long, those whose stories had gone unheard. And with this new responsibility came new pressure. Sam often found herself torn between the demands of her newfound platform and the quiet life she once craved. But deep down, she knew that she couldn't walk away. Her voice was needed now more than ever, and so she continued, sometimes tired, sometimes overwhelmed, but always pushing forward. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of interviews and meetings, Sam sat at her kitchen table, staring out of the window. The rain had begun to fall, soft and steady against the glass, and she could feel its rhythm in her bones. Duke lay at her feet, his warm body a constant reminder that no matter what the world threw at her, she was never truly alone. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from a young woman named Olivia, someone Sam had never met but whose story mirrored her own. The message read, "You don't know me, but I just wanted to say thank you. Your story gave me the strength to speak up. I've been through so much, but your journey made me realize I'm not alone." A tear slipped down Sam's cheek as she read the words. She had no idea who Olivia was, but she felt the weight of her gratitude settle deep in her chest. This was why she did it. This was why she fought. To know that her story had made a difference, that it had created a ripple of change, was more than she could ever have asked for. Sam wiped her tear away and reached down to scratch Duke's head. He looked up at her, his eyes soft with understanding, and nudged her hand. "Thank you, Duke," she whispered, "for everything." And for the first time in a long while, Sam felt at peace. She had found her purpose, and it was to keep moving forward, to continue shining light on the stories of those who had been left in the dark. She wasn't done yet, and there was so much more to do. The sound of applause echoed in Sam's ears as she stepped onto the stage. It had been months since the first rally, and yet the nerves still fluttered in her stomach. She had come so far, far beyond the fear and confusion of that fateful night. But even now, as she looked out over the crowd, her heart raced. Duke sat beside her, ever calm, his eyes scanning the room as if assuring her that everything was okay. He was her anchor, her constant, and as they stood together on the stage, Sam knew that this was their moment. It wasn't just her victory, it was theirs. The applause wasn't just for her. It was for every person who had been silenced, for every person who had felt invisible. Sam took a deep breath and stepped forward to the microphone. The lights were bright, almost blinding, but she didn't flinch. She was no longer afraid of being seen. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady but soft. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for seeing me. Not as a blind woman, not as someone with a disability, but as a person. Someone with a story, someone with a voice. I'm standing here today because of all of you, because you gave me the courage to keep going." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. "Together, we've started something bigger than any one of us. Together, we've made sure that no one else has to feel the way I did that night. Alone, helpless, forgotten." A few people in the crowd wiped their eyes, their expressions heavy with understanding. Sam's chest tightened with emotion, but she steadied herself, knowing that this was her moment to give back, to inspire others the way she had been inspired. The applause came again, louder this time, filling the air with energy and hope. Sam smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was a quiet victory, but it was hers. And it was a victory shared by every person who had fought for their dignity, for their place in the world. When the applause finally began to die down, Sam stepped back from the microphone. She turned to Duke, who had been silently watching her the entire time. He wagged his tail as if acknowledging the moment, and Sam's heart swelled.
"We did it, Duke,"
she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We did it. They had both come so far. But their journey wasn't over. It would never be over. There would always be more people to fight for, more stories to tell, more work to be done. And Sam, with Duke by her side, was ready to face whatever came next. Together, Sam had always imagined her life would be quiet, filled with the small, peaceful moments that most people take for granted. The sound of birds in the morning, the rustle of leaves as the wind picks up, the simple joy of walking through a sunlit park. She had never expected to become a symbol, never expected to be the face of a movement. But now, with every passing day, she felt the weight of that responsibility settle more deeply within her. It wasn't a burden, not exactly. It was a privilege she carried with pride, even on the days when it seemed impossible to keep going. But there were moments late at night when she lay awake that she wondered if she was truly making a difference, if the change she sought would ever come fast enough. The journey had been long, with no shortage of hurdles along the way. There were still so many people who didn't understand what it meant to live with a disability. So many others who couldn't see the value of a service dog. But in the face of it all, Sam had found something far more important than the fight itself. She had found a deep well of compassion within herself, a well that had been filled by the very people she was fighting for. One afternoon, while Sam was at a local cafe, she received a letter that would change everything. It was addressed to her from the mother of a young boy named Ethan, who had been born blind and recently received his first service dog. The letter spoke of Ethan's struggles, his frustrations with the world that often saw him as less than human, but also of his newfound hope, the joy that had returned to his eyes because of the bond he shared with his dog. "Dear Sam, you are the reason my son believes in himself again. You showed him that it's okay to be who he is. That even though he can't see the world, there's still so much to be seen through the heart. Thank you for showing us what true strength looks like." Sam's hands trembled as she read the letter, the words feeling like a balm to her weary soul. She had known that her story had reached people. But it was different. This wasn't just a message of thanks. It was a testament to the ripple effect of her journey, the way one person's voice could lift another and another and another. Duke sat by her side, his head resting on her lap. She looked down at him, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. It was moments like this that reminded her why she fought, why they both fought together. The journey wasn't just about fighting for justice, it was about creating a legacy. A legacy that would outlive her and Duke. A legacy of compassion, understanding, and empowerment. It was about showing the world that people with disabilities weren't just victims. They were warriors, they were pioneers, and they were full of untapped potential. And she would be there to fight for every one of them. As she sat in that cafe, Surrounded by the noise and chatter of everyday life, Sam realized that she had found her place in the world. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a beacon for others, a guiding light in a world that sometimes seemed dark. And with Duke by her side, she knew that they would continue to shine, continue to lead the way for those who still felt lost. They had made it through the storm, and now the sun was finally breaking through. Time had a way of moving too quickly, and yet, when Sam reflected on how far she had come, she realized how much had changed. Duke was no longer just her guide dog, he was her partner, her protector, and her best friend. They had grown together, faced the world's harshest storms, and come out the other side stronger than ever. But more than that, they had shared something deeper. A bond that transcended words, one that was built on trust, respect, and love. Sam's life was no longer defined by the attack, by the cruelty of that night. It wasn't about what had happened to her anymore. It was about what she had done with it. She had turned her pain into purpose, her struggle into strength, and now, she was helping others do the same. But it wasn't just the public victories that mattered, it was the quiet moments too. The moments where Sam would sit on the porch, the evening sun casting long shadows across the lawn, and Duke would curl up beside her, his body warm against her legs. The moments where they didn't have to say anything at all, where simply being in each other's presence was enough. In those moments, Sam realized that it wasn't just about the noise of the world or the applause she received. It was about the people she had helped, the lives she had touched, and the future she had started to build for others. It was about ensuring that people with disabilities were seen, understood, and respected. It was about showing the world that they had something valuable to offer, that they were capable of achieving great things, just like everyone else. And as she looked down at Duke, his eyes calm and steady, Sam knew that her work was far from over. There were still people who needed to be heard, still barriers to break down, still injustices to fight. But she was no longer afraid of the road ahead. She was ready for it. Because with Duke by her side, there was nothing she couldn't face. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they would continue to walk toward tomorrow, one step at a time, one victory at a time, until the world was a little kinder, a little more understanding, a little more just. The sound of Duke's gentle breathing filled the quiet evening air, a soft reminder of the bond that had carried them both through the darkest days. And as the last light of the day faded, Sam smiled to herself. They had made it, and they were only just getting started. As the days stretched into months, Sam stood at the edge of her apartment's balcony, overlooking the city that once felt so overwhelming. The skyline now looked different to her, a little softer, a little more familiar. The morning sun bathed everything in a golden glow, and for the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider in her own world. The world around her felt reachable, even for someone like her, and that was enough to make her heart swell with gratitude. Duke, always by her side, lay on the floor near the door, his steady breathing filling the quiet room. She glanced down at him, and a sense of peace settled over her. They had been through so much together, and yet here they were, standing tall, unshaken, and ready for whatever came next. They had found strength not just in themselves, but in each other. Their bond had been forged in the fire of adversity, and it was unbreakable. Sam couldn't help but think back to the night that had changed everything. The night when her world had been turned upside down. The attack by the officers, the confusion, the fear, it all felt like it happened in another lifetime. At the time, she never could have imagined that she would be standing here today. Stronger, more determined, and with a voice that was finally being heard. The road had been long, and there were days when she felt like giving up. But she hadn't. She couldn't. Not when there were still so many others out there who needed a voice, who needed someone to fight for them. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from a woman named Clara. Sam had met her at one of the rallies. Clara had a service dog too, and she had reached out to Sam for advice on how to navigate the system. It was one of the many messages she received every day, and though it was overwhelming at times, it was also a reminder of how far her story had reached. She read Clara's message as, "Sam, you don't know how much your words helped me. After our conversation, I found the courage to file a complaint against the officer who harassed me and my dog. I never thought I could do that, but you showed me it's possible. Thank you for being my inspiration." A smile tugged at Sam's lips as she typed out a reply, her fingers flying across the screen. It felt strange, but in the best way, to know that her pain had somehow sparked a fire in someone else. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a movement, a collective effort to make the world a safer place for people like her and people like Clara. Duke shifted, stretching his long body before looking up at her with those familiar, steady eyes. He had always known when she needed him the most. He was more than just a dog. He was her anchor, her protector, her unwavering source of comfort in a world that had often felt hostile. In his eyes, she saw the promise of a future that was bright with possibility. They'd made it through the worst, and now they could move forward together. Sam stood up, her muscles stiff from sitting too long, and walked over to Duke, bending down to scratch behind his ears. His tail wagged slightly, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. The storm had passed. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Sam knew she was ready for whatever came next. She had survived the darkest days of her life, and she wasn't going to stop now. In that moment, she understood something deep within herself. The victory wasn't just in the headlines, in the interviews, or the court hearings. It was in the quiet moments, the small victories, the times when she showed up for herself, for Duke, and for everyone who needed her. Her legacy was not just about fighting the injustice she had faced. It was about creating a world where people like her, like Clara, could live freely, without fear, without shame. Sam reached down and clipped Duke's leash to his harness. Together, they walked out of the apartment into the sunlight, ready to face the world once more. They were no longer fighting alone. They were part of something bigger now, something that would continue to grow long after they were gone. And as they stepped into the world outside, side by side, Sam knew that this was just the beginning. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they would walk toward a future filled with hope, compassion, and the promise of a better tomorrow. The sun shone brightly above them, casting long shadows on the pavement. And in that light, Sam knew that no matter what came next, she and Duke would always walk forward together.